Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We'll go ahead and call this December 10th regular City Commission meeting to order. Could I begin with an approval of the agenda?
Motion to approve.
Second.
I have a motion from Commissioner Hurst and a second from Commissioner Martin. Are there any questions, comments, or changes from the motion from the dais? Do I have any public questions or comments on the agenda? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes unanimously. I would like to invite Naeem Urchid to the podium, please. If you would, he's going to give us our invocation tonight. If you would, please remain standing after the invocation for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you, Naeem.
Thank you. Heavenly Father, we come before you now and thank you for the life we live and how we live and where we live. We thank you for your protection over us and our families. Thank you for those who place their lives on the lines every day to protect us, police, firefighter, EMS, military. Lord, we ask you now to be present with us tonight in every decision, in everything we hear. Anything that's made in this room, be it your voice. We ask for your will to be done and not ours. We ask that it be your voice being heard and not our own. Lord, we ask you please to continuously guide our leaders and to be the light in the darkness. Please continue to protect us and keep our families safe and keep you in all we do. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Naeem. That was beautiful.
Mr. Mayor,
Commissioner Farnsworth?
before we get started, I'm on call for work tonight, so if I leave abruptly, that's the reason why.
Okay, we appreciate the heads up, and we will certainly understand. All right, we have our first presentation. I think Mr. Jones will lead us through that. It's a happy moment for one person and sad for the rest of us. So you got a green light there?
There we go. Good evening once again. It is a little bittersweet for us. Carl Wilson, our Public Works Supervisor, has announced that he will be retiring here shortly, and wanted to recognize him tonight. Carl and his wife are proud parents of 3 children and 10 grandchildren. He came to the city of Newberry in 2011, bringing with him over 3 decades of public works experience with Alachua County. In 2014, Carl was promoted to the Public Works Supervisor, where he oversees the maintenance and operation of the city's road network, operation of the cemetery, oversight of our solid waste contractor, and our mosquito spraying program. The Alachua County roads within the city are maintained through interlocal with Alachua County, and Carl is an integral and important part of the city's utilities and public works department. Carl is world-renowned for his customer service and his ability to resolve customer complaints and concerns. And in his downtime, Carl enjoys fishing, bowling, golf, and is Gator forever. Tonight, we would like to thank and honor and commend Carl for his service to the citizens of Newberry and public service by declaring January 2nd, 2019 as Carl L. Wilson Day in the city of Newberry. And if it pleases the mayor, I'll read the proclamation.
Please.
A little quote: to give real service, you must add something which cannot be bought or measured with money, and that's sincerity and integrity. Douglas Adams. Whereas Carl L. Wilson has announced his retirement from the City of Newberry Public Works Department effective January 3rd, 2019, after 7 years of loyal and dedicated service, and whereas Carl L. Wilson began his distinguished career with the City of Newberry Streets Roads Department as a part-time technician, and where Carl L. Wilson has worked his way up from part-time to full-time in Public Works, and in January 2014 was promoted to the management position of Public Works Supervisor, whereas Carl L. Wilson has provided a high level of dedication and courteous customer service to the citizens of the City of Newberry, and whereas Carl Wilson has set an excellent example for all other City of Newberry staff to follow, and whereas Carl L. Wilson will be truly missed by the citizens and staff of the City of Newberry, now therefore the City of Newberry Mayor and City Commission do hereby express, honor, and commend Carl L. Wilson for his exemplary service to the citizens of Newberry as Public Works Supervisor and his commitment to public service. Be it further proclaimed that City of Newberry City Commission do hereby declare in the City of Newberry January 2nd, 2019, Carl L. Wilson Day.
You got to get a picture first. Hang on 1 second, I gotta get one in here too. We appreciate everything you've done, sir. You gotta say a couple words, you can't get out of here.
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to work with the City of Newberry. I started out with Connie and recommended over Mr. Jones and Mr. New. But it's been a pleasure. If I knew how Newberry was a long time ago, I might have started with Newberry way back in the 70s. But I appreciate working with you guys, and Newberry's a good place to work.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Manager.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to just chime in a little bit. First, Carl is a wonderful family man, and we appreciate his family for sharing him with us for these number of years. He has added so much value to the City of Newberry, both with his knowledge of equipment and how to do things right in public works. He's been a mentor to our staff and taught them how we do things in business. And in government, we get the criticism, rightly or wrongly, all the time for not being passionate about what we do and just being jaded or coming to work and just making eight. And Carl is none of that. He has great customer service skills. He really cares about doing it well. He sets an outstanding example for our staff, and he's been one of the best and brightest things going on in Newberry since he started here, and will be sorely missed. I appreciate everything that you've done for the City of Newberry. You've really moved the ball for us over the years that you've been here, and thank you very much, Carl.
Thank you. I would say, before we move on, that the level of complaints that I dealt with about our roads was off the charts, and then you came, and that was it. So I appreciate all that you've done, but in particular, I appreciate that skill that hopefully you have taught somebody else in the City of Newberry before you leave.
If not, you have a month to do it.
Okay. Does the commission have anything else they wanted to say? All right. Item B is the beginning of something that I hope is pretty special here in the City of Newberry. And before I read this proclamation, I would like to invite the business owner who had this idea and brought us all together to begin this journey to please come to the podium and tell us a little bit about what inspired him to have this vision and share with us a little bit about what moved him to bring us all to this. And he loves to talk in front of people, on camera especially. So if you will, welcome Mike Lehman down to the podium. Tell us a little bit.
So I owe both you and Jessica one for this. So, it obviously all started when we had the tragedy in Gilchrist. My family has a long history of either being in the law enforcement or being firefighters. And it struck me how we have an outpouring of emotion when we lose an officer, but we don't celebrate them enough while they're here to see it. And we also have a movement in this country to demonize the folks behind the badge, our first line of defense. And I thought it would be, I just felt we should do something to, A, show them how we feel about them, but also let their families see them in a better light and not just have to see what the media or other outlets say about them. So I contacted Mayor Marlowe and Jessica Norfleet, who And I just had this little idea, and then it went, let's just make it big. And now I'm up here talking in front of all of you fine folks. So again, it's just a way to celebrate law enforcement and show them our appreciation for what they do on a day-to-day basis. So, you want to add anything else? Okay, so there you go.
Well, we appreciate you. We appreciate you having the idea and bringing everyone together. And I want to also extend that gratitude to Jessica Norfleet. You know, Congressman Yoho, I think every success he had is probably because of Jessica Norfleet personally.
Well, that's what I tell everybody.
And this one's going to be the same thing. But Congressman Yoho's office has been all on board since the beginning with this initiative. And hopefully in the upcoming months, we'll have some pretty exciting news to start spreading. But it all does start tonight. And so with that, we have, I believe, representatives from every single law enforcement agency that's represented here in Alachua County. Could I get you fine folks to come and stand up here and face the crowd so I'm going to invite you guys up here. And then I think I'll read the proclamation from the dais, and then I'll move in front to hand out to each agency. But if you would be so kind, we appreciate it.
There is still a supervisor from ASO on its way.
Oh, we have someone coming that's not here.
You don't want to make her angry.
And I lack the ability to ad-lib for that long of a period of time. On their way, like, parking? Or?
Yeah, when I got into Newberry, he was on a call and he was saying he was in route.
Oh, okay.
It's not Becky, you're fine.
Okay. All right. Well, let me read this proclamation, and then hopefully that he or she will get here by the time we hand them out. Yeah, they make their speed. Since September 11, 2001. Oh, there. Perfect timing. See, he was trying to do that on purpose. I knew that was going on. Come on down and join us in the front, sir, so we can recognize you.
You're in good company up here.
All right. Since September 11, 2001, many in this nation and this Congress have a deeper appreciation for the importance and the sacrifices made by our law enforcement officers. Jerry Costello. Whereas the city of Newberry recognizes the extraordinary service and sacrifice of the men and women in law enforcement who keep our community safe, enforce the rule of law, and respond in times of crisis. And whereas law enforcement officers play such an integral part in our society, they are the guardians of our way of life, and they deserve our support. And whereas each loss of a law enforcement officer is not only heart-wrenching, but a cry for peace and a prayer for our men and women in uniform who protect our community on a daily basis, to protect our schools, places of business, roadways, and homes. And whereas Florida Highway Patrol, Alachua County Sheriff's Office, City of Alachua Police Department, City of Gainesville Police Department, City of High Springs Police Department, Santa Fe College Police Department, University of Florida Police Department, and the Florida Wildlife Commission are some of the bravest and most courageous men and women in uniform anywhere in the country. And now, therefore, I, Jordan Marlowe, Mayor of the City of Newberry, do hereby proclaim January 9th, 2019, as Law Enforcement Appreciation Day. We further call upon all citizens of Newberry to take time not only on Wednesday, January 9th, 2019, but throughout the entire month of January to show their support of law enforcement officers.
Maybe you just stand out in the hall, you should be able to get it.
Stand on the side again. I'll get in the middle of it.
There we
No,
go.
but can we get together like we're a team?
We can hand by the
about to keep a distance.
I know. We just.
with each other. Hey, you move back a little bit.
I'm working on it. There we go.
Stand on a chair.
I was going to. Back here in the corner. There we go. All right. No, I'm watching you.
Can you get the writing?
You have the, I have the mom voice. I got you guys. Thank you so much. Thank you.
We'd love to hear from anybody that likes.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, bring the appreciation back to you as well. So commissioners, city mayor, city manager, attorney, Lieutenant Narwhal, Alachua Police Department, on behalf of our agency and Chief Scott, Chad Scott, as well as all these other agencies, and really the profession in itself, like, to have the appreciation. We don't look for awards or accommodations for what we do. Most of us, it's a calling. We go out and we're going to do it regardless of what the circumstances are. But to get everybody likes to be appreciated. And you know, like the current environment that this gentleman displayed or talked about, you know, it's been probably a really rough 5 years for this profession. We're losing officers, leaving the profession, not encouraging. There's a recruitment that's gone way down. So with that environment, it's tough, and it's even tougher to keep them motivated and wanting to come to work to do it, and they're kind of battling, and their families deal with that too, so they're always in defense of their loved ones going to put uniforms on. So to have a city recognize what we do as a profession, even locally or nationally, so it's a big deal. So I just want you to know that we appreciate you recognizing that and taking the time, and from citizens to cities recognizing that. We sincerely appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a very small way to say thank you, but we do appreciate
It's
you.
a very big thing. It may seem small, but I guarantee you that's a lot of motivation for a lot of officers to continue doing what they do. So thank you.
Well, we need you. Oh, I thought Ms. Norfleet was getting up to come to the podium. Oh, okay, I was going to, yeah, absolutely. Did the commission have any?
Thank you.
Thank you all. We appreciate you. Merry Christmas. We understand. We've got the ASO officer. He'll be here till about 11 o'clock tonight. We'll keep, he came late, so he gets to stay longer. Yeah. Okay, it is very exciting stuff there, and hopefully we'll have some more announcements to make. All right, we've reached the first time in our agenda for public announcements. Anybody that has any non-controversial, they want to let us know something's going on, 2-minute type announcements, please make your way to the podium now to do so. Seeing none, we'll move on to the consent agenda. I have a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
I have a
Second.
motion from Commissioner Glanzer, a second from Commissioner Martin. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously. We'll move on to our first public hearing and ordinance. Mr. Mayor, you want to go ahead, Mr. Attorney, you want to go ahead and read that ordinance?
I will.
In for us, please, as Brian makes his way down.
You got there so quick. You got ahead of me a little bit. I am there. Mr. Mayor, this is ordinance number 2018-21, an ordinance of the City of Newberry, Florida, amending the text of the City of Newberry Land Development Regulations as amended to amend Section 5.39 entitled Bonding in lieu of completed improvements, Section 14.5 entitled Assurance of Completion of Public Improvements, Section 4.21 entitled PD Plan Development, Section 4.18 entitled PRRD Planned Rural Residential Development, and Section 4.29 entitled MU Mixed Use Development, repealing all ordinances in conflict and providing an effective date. The appropriate motion is to pass ordinance number 2018-21 as read by title only.
Do I have that motion?
So moved.
I have a motion. And a second, a motion from Commissioner Farnsworth, a second from Commissioner Coleman. All right, Brian, take us through this, where we ended up.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
We've been presented this before, but we were at.
Yes, sir. Back on November 15th, this information was originally presented to the Commission. At that time, the Commission asked staff to go ahead and draft an ordinance for first reading and bring it back as soon as possible. And so that's what we have before you today. Just as a quick review, Amy's going to help me with this high-tech device here. Guess not. Thank you. I didn't even know there was an on switch. Thought it was always on. Okay. Okay, now it works great. As you might remember, staff was asked to evaluate a different form of surety device than we currently allow. It's one that the city of Gainesville has had in their land development code for a number of years. Basically, it provides two options. One is a construction loan agreement where the developer takes out a loan of 120% of the estimated cost of improvements. Payments which would be made to the city in the event of default by the developer. The city has to approve all of the payments prior to bank disbursement to the developer, which also entails inspections and review of the documentation from the developer's engineer. And the remaining loan value towards the end of the developing period would not go below 30%. So there's a 30% cushion there, even at the end, if necessary, to complete the project. The second option would allow the developer to take out a loan of 100% and then basically personally guarantee the remaining 20%. It was considered to be considerably more risky than the first option, simply because if you think about it conceptually, if you have a developer that's already in default on the 100% portion, then it's going to be highly unlikely, if not impossible, for the city to actually recover the 20% on top of that from a personal promise. And so staff recommendations, staff believes that the construction loan form of surety is essentially the same as the tri-party agreements that we no longer accept. However, one of the goals of the Commission has been to be developer friendly and to be competitive with surrounding communities as well. And so staff notes that other government agencies in the area are using this form of surety for their construction improvements. They do allow it. And the city attorney did advise that this type of a surety device would have to be approved by the Commission before we could use it in our code. And so you may remember the responses that the Commission stated they may be interested in allowing a form of construction loan agreement similar to option 1. There did not seem to be any support for the riskier version, option 2. And so the Commission directed staff to come back with a draft ordinance, which we've done tonight. Basically, the ordinance accomplishes two goals. Number one, since we were working on surety in that area of code, decided to do a little bit of cleanup, and so that's what section 1 here does. It clarifies the allowable forms of surety that were approved in previous Commission meetings, clarifies some of the requirements that the sureties have, and then there were several sections in the code where sureties were referred to, and then they would go through the laundry list of requirements. And so rather than have surety requirements spread out all over the code in various sections, we combined all of that into basically, in all of those places, it references section 5.39 and takes out all of the extraneous code. You can see that in the underline and strike through in the draft ordinance. The reason for that.
Staff has asked, even if you vote down a motion on the floor, you then follow right up with a motion to keep the amended language is much cleaner. It points everybody back to specific articles without having it dabbled across the board. So I just wanted to make that comment before it slipped my brain.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, absolutely. In The benefit there is that now everything in our code points to one section, so that if the commission desires to amend that, the surety requirements in the future, by amending that one section only, it goes across the board and covers everything else in the code relative to surety agreements. The second thing that it accomplishes is it brings in the language for the construction loan agreement. It would be basically very similar to option 1 that the City of Gainesville allows. We're required to take out a loan of at least 120% of the estimated cost of improvements payable to the city upon default. The developer's engineer would be required to certify each segment of construction prior to requesting the draw, and then the city crews would inspect the infrastructure that had been constructed and review the engineer's certifications, and then if everything was in order, sign off on the bank draw for disbursement to the developer. It does establish an inspection and review fee of $200 for each of the draws requested, and then the remaining loan value would not be allowed. The remaining loan value that the bank would withhold towards the end would be 45%. Staff believes that 30% is a little bit light if you actually get into a serious problem with a default at midway or later in the development, and so we put in 45% as the limit that the bank would be required to hold.
And Brian, if you're asking for 20% over, the 45% is really 25% over the projected cost of the project. Is that?
Yes, thank you, sir. I forgot to bring that up. Since the estimated cost is 100%, assuming that costs come in fairly close to that, then the retainage would be 20% plus the 25%. So it wouldn't be a 45% of project costs, it would be 25% of project costs. That's what would be the remainder that the bank would be holding back, plus the 20% overage in case the city had to take over and there are additional costs. So it would be 25% of the total estimated costs. And so commission options, of course, would be to approve ordinance 2018-21 on first reading, approve with changes, deny the ordinance, or to postpone consideration to time certain.
Okay. Done, Brian?
Yes, sir.
Questions from the dais, Commissioner Glander?
I want to thank you for, showing us the risks that we were exposed to, but I would move to approve ordinance 2018-21.
We already have a motion.
You already have a motion, so never mind. I just say.
You're just stating your support for the motion on the floor. Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments of staff from the dais? Commissioner Martin.
Brian, I'm a little outside of my understanding on a lot of this stuff. I was not here at the last meeting. Because it's banking and numbers, I usually rely on Commissioner Coleman on this, probably errantly, but I still do. Does the banks offer 120% financing? Can they even get something? I'm wondering if they can even get what we're even talking about here.
Mr. Mayor, yeah, it's actually common practice at 120% or sometimes even greater. For commercial loans like that, and large commercial projects like that, there's an assumption that there could be cost overruns in excess of a certain amount, and so the banks will set aside the extra amount. It's not like a personal loan or a mortgage where you're trying to purchase an actual item. There's a lot of variability along the way, and so they have to factor in cost overruns, change orders, those kind of things along the way. And so as it is right now, the banks, and actually when we were doing tri-party agreements, the banks would do 110 to 120% for the developer.
I heard you talking about the $200 for them, almost like a draw approval. But what's the difference between when we're doing that and when we're doing an inspection, a normal inspection?
Mr. Mayor, under the old tri-party agreements, the utility director would inspect the documents, and as long as the requirement was that if the developer's engineer signed off on it. Under this scenario, the utility department actually inspects and approves for service the infrastructure. It's not put into service at that time, but it's the same, as I understand it, the way Gainesville does it, it's the same level of inspection as if you're going to accept it into service. Mr. Manager?
I think we disagree on that. If there's 1,000 foot of pipe and the contractor claims that he's put in 700 feet and therefore 70% complete, I think that the inspection would verify that. The inspection as approval for service involves hydrostatic pressure testing or other types of performance testing that wouldn't happen until the very end of the project. So I would say that there is a verification. It's kind of like on a home draw. The bank will send an inspector out and say, yep, they've completed the framing, or they're 50% through the framing or the sheathing on the roof. I think you'll get the same level of quantity verification, but I don't think that we'd be able to. We won't run tracer on the tracer wire. We won't do a video inspection of the sewer system, a smoke testing of the sewer system. So it wouldn't be approved for acceptance. It would just be verification of quantities.
Here.
Well, sorry, you're doing great. Yeah. Just a clarification.
Now I agree.
Yep.
What got us started on this path?
There was a request from one of our local developers to add this as a acceptable surety device in our acceptable list. Right now, we only accept non-diminishing escrow accounts, irrevocable letters of credit, and performance bonds. This, again, this was similar to the tri-party agreement we used to accept, where the developer takes out the loan and includes the city as a beneficiary in the case of default. It just has a little bit higher level of inspections during the process and the sign-off by the city before the draws are approved. So there's an extra level.
Don't the surety bonds provide us financial reimbursement in the case of damages? And I don't know if I'm seeing that here in a loan. And I admit I'm totally ignorant about it, so I'm trying to put it in terms of things I understand.
You're right. I think that there is danger associated with, the more liberalized you are in this juncture, the more possibility there could be where the city would perhaps be in a difficult position. So you've got your 20% override. You're not going to go below the 25% disbursement under the construction loan agreement. So you've got 45% of your money that's going to be in the bank. Hopefully there's been sufficient inspections along the way and engineering certifications that you're not going to get stuck. I think there could be a potential where the city could get into a situation where somehow you were in a difficult position. But I think what the argument is, at least to get us to this point, is that we may have gone too far. The pendulum may have swung too far a year ago or whenever it was that we were originally taking this up, and we were too highly restrictive. And some of your sister cities, including the city of Gainesville, allows for a more development-friendly circumstance such as this. And if we can stay on top of the projects with our inspections and the draws, and the contractor does not get ahead of us, then we should not be subject to getting stuck in a situation where the infrastructure is not, the improvements are not there, and there's no money in the bank to rectify the situation.
We're relying on our own edification of all these systems and whether or not they're even done correctly.
And inspected by engineers, so there's going to be engineering inspection, our own public works inspections, so we shouldn't be subjected to a problem. That would be the safety net, I think.
Okay. Are we even at a place that we can handle this stuff appropriately and on a timely basis that the builder, the developer, the commercial agent, or whoever's doing these can even get this stuff done?
You want to think about that answer? Well, because that's going to. I think that question was brought up before.
I was going to say that very question was brought up before, and it's a very good point. There is always the possibility that because we are a small staff and have limited personnel qualified to go out and do the inspections, that when the developer is ready for that draw, that there may be some delay between when the city can actually schedule and get out there, do all the inspections, review the certifications, and then sign off on it. So that would, in the effort to be more developer friendly, we could actually take a step backwards and slow things down a little bit. That is a possibility, but the benefit to the developer is that the current forms of surety that we have all have some drawbacks to the developer. The performance bond is going to cost between 2 and 3% of the project cost. The irrevocable line of credit, letter of credit, ties up a substantial amount of their credit, while they also usually borrow the money for the project itself. And then, of course, an escrow, you've got a substantial amount of cash sitting there unused while the project is in development. So this allows them to procure their loan funds at less of a cost than any of the other options to them.
I guess I get that. I feel I'm a little concerned about our ability to perform in the instance of just kind of overpromising, and this is another potential point, because it's going to cost the developer money if we can't get out there and do our end of the bargain also. But I'll let some other people discuss.
Commissioner Herson, was that a reach for the mic or just
Yeah,
a
that was.
stretch?
I guess that was some of my same comment was. So we're allowing the contractor to have less upfront money or less cost to go about doing this, but then they're potentially waiting on the city, and so that cost benefit of, all right, it didn't cost as much as loan, but if we're a day behind, a day costs an independent contractor money, are they going to tolerate that with the idea that, hey, we just cost you, the idea, you didn't have to spend as much money to get your loan, but we can't guarantee you that we're always returning it.
Commissioner Herson, before you move on to the next question, can we get, because I'm not exactly understanding how it's costing the developer money here. So, and I understand that the developer may think it's costing him money because he's got to get the draw out, he needs us to come give the inspection, but that to me seems more on the developers on a communication system. So it may be that it costs the developer money, but do you have thoughts on that, Mr. Manager?
Well, Mr. Mayor, I do. I think that where it costs the developer is in the time to get their money. There's no stoppage of work. They get to the end of the month. Let's just say they're doing monthly draws, and when we write this up, we probably wouldn't allow draws to be any more frequently than monthly. So, it's whether he gets paid this Thursday or next Thursday. It depends on the Public Works Director's ability to get out and inspect. He's not waiting on some approval to move to the next phase of construction, which would really be an issue of concern, because now the city could potentially delay the completion of the project. We're not delaying completion of the project. We would simply be a factor in the timing for when they get a release on this money that's being held in this escrow account.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Yeah, that's good. And I guess the other thing I look at is hazard versus risk. I mean, the hazard of a default is always present there, but what is the actual risk of it happening? And the reason probably why we moved away from the tri-party agreement.
It's fair that there, as I think we discussed before, there haven't been a lot of defaults in our area, but the few examples there have been, one of them especially that we know of in Alachua was pretty monumental, and so took years to clear up. and several $1 million in back and forth. And so there's always that potential there. No developer ever enters into a project thinking I'm going to default on this. Of course, the assumption is always that it's going to go to completion. It's going to be a successful project, and the vast majority of the time they are. It's just a matter of, and as we stated before, staff is really neutral on this. It's just a matter of how much risk the commission is willing to take on. I think last time when we talked about it, I was asked to evaluate relative to, say, the tri-party agreements and the devices that we currently allow, the risk. If you look at the tri-party agreement as, say, a 10 on the risk scale, and our existing surety allowable devices is 3, then option 1, which we're presenting here, would be somewhere probably in the 8 range. It is less risky in our assessment than the full tri-party agreement, but it is still riskier than the other surety agreements that maintain 120% of value throughout the entirety of the project.
Commissioner Herson, were you completed? Commissioner Martin?
Brian and maybe the city manager, talk me through some of the controls that are kind of in place already, because ultimately, like Commissioner Herson was talking about, it's really what's the chances of the risk, what are the risks, and I want to feel better about it being more of a partnership, and although there is the dynamic that we're the city government, we're protecting the people, they're the developer, but they're going to be waiting on us on their draws. I understand it doesn't affect their project time schedule, but if something goes south, they've gone ahead, put the cart before the horse sort of thing. But make me feel a little bit more comfortable about what controls are already in place for us to be able to even perform on this to begin with, because we're adding something to the building department's plate, are we not?
Actually, Mr. Mayor, it would be adding a little bit to, the Public Works and Utilities Department plate. They're the ones who are going to be doing the inspections along the way, and the city already does. The city staff already does spot inspections along the way, and keeps an eye on how things are going along the way. This would add a little bit more element of inspection and documentation review, and it would require in that respect, it would add a little bit more security in that the developer would be required to get their engineer would be required to actually inspect and certify that the work had been done as presented. And so at least up to that point, up to the point of each draw, there's a very good expectation that the work was done correctly, and that the documentation is correct.
Can you sketch out a 30-second review of how this process, what you envision this timeline?
You want to take a crack at it? You want me to? The option that you're considering tonight looks just like one of our 2 options that we currently have, where we can post a letter of credit. It's a savings account. The difference being that there's a drawdown in this one that there isn't in our current and what's being proposed. So how it looks to us is that periodically, probably no more than once a month, the developer says, I want to draw my letter of credit or my savings account down from 120% down to what I've completed to date. Okay. So he will notify his engineer of record, who will go do an inspection and a certification, and said they've installed 20% of the work. And so we'll say, okay, it can come down 20%. Jamie would review that. Jamie would go out and do a field verification that, yep, looks like that they've put in that 20% of the pipe.
Ideally together at the same time?
No, never at the same time. The engineer is going to certify it to Jamie first and transmit it to Jamie. So Jamie will get a certification that he's 20% complete. Jamie would take that, go out into the field, and concur or not, and but mostly would concur because the engineer certifying it means he's putting his license on the line. Would sign off on it, and forward it back to the developer, who could then take it to the lender. He would copy the planning department, then take it to the lender, and the lender would release those funds, 20% of the funds, until they hit that bottom threshold, which is currently 45%. Once he hits 45%, there's no more withdrawals until the project is completed and accepted by the city, and then we replace it with a 10% maintenance bond. We hold a maintenance bond, which is worth 10% of the value of construction for one year, 12 months.
This is, you know, a modified proposal of what you guys looked at about 3 or 4 years ago and rejected. Now, I think as the city attorney alluded to, in that time period, other cities have changed their thinking, and you guys have shown your willingness to take a risk in other areas, most notably with the utility deposit program. You know, while I agree with the city manager, I don't think this actually costs the developer money if we miss an inspection. I certainly see the PR of the developer's ability to go out and say, the city's costing me all this money that they couldn't get my inspection, now I can't get my draw, you know, and it'll be all of our fault because we couldn't make the inspection. So there is a little bit of a partnership, I guess, with this. We're willing to take a little bit of risk to give the developer another option that maybe doesn't tie up quite as much money. But while I agree with the city manager that it doesn't actually cost them money, I think 100% you guys lose the public relations battle, and you'll absolutely be blamed for it costing the developer money if we miss an inspection.
I mean, I can handle that, and I'm willing to take that on. That's not really an issue. I'm willing to at least try it. I think for my sake, and I don't know about anybody else's, to actually have the procedure kind of written down so that it's actually on paper, that the builder can see, that I can see, would take the training wheels off for me.
Commissioner Herson.
So in the ordinance, it says they can utilize any combination of surety devices. How often do developers use combinations, or are they always generally an all or nothing?
Mr. Mayor, I'm not aware of any locally in the last 5 years. I'm sure there are instances around where they choose to use an escrow for part of it and then a performance bond for another part, or if they have a loan agreement available to them, that they would borrow the amount of money that they felt comfortable with. And
I asked that in light of risk exposure to the city. The other question, and make sure I understood this right, and did I understand that the commission would approve every one of these? No. Okay.
Other comments from the dais? Comments from the public? Anyone want to make a public comment? Expression of support? Okay, hearing none then. Oh, Tripp is going to? I can't see him through Brian. Is he on his? He's finishing his comments on his phone there. He's got a dissertation to read for us tonight. All right. Welcome, sir. Merry Christmas.
You. Y'all have a good Christmas. Yeah, no, I think the staff, they did a good job saying what we had. I know y'all was worried about the inspections. They already inspect them now, so take it for right now, the way we're doing it now. If, just say if I get a loan on a piece of project there, and we put all the sewer pipe in, well, then we have to get the inspector, our engineer to come inspect it. And our bank actually hires them as a third party, which they pay them directly. And so then the inspector will come in, the engineer will come inspect it, off the bank's third party, and they inspect it and look at it. And we usually send those papers to the city anyway. And then Jamie, he comes periodically to check. And matter of fact, I think 2 weeks ago, y'all put y'all's new project manager, Jed. He come out there and checked on a bunch of this stuff. Oh, he's good. And, but we've never had a problem with the city inspecting that stuff because, you're talking throughout a project like that, maybe 4 inspections you know, for what we're doing on the phase. So timing wise and costing the developer money is really not a big issue. And like I said, one of these things we was hoping it would do is just give us one more option to go with. And like you said, you know, if you did that phase, so there's 4 phases in it, or 4 steps. You got water and your sewer and your storm, and then your road. And say we put in the sewer, and say just it was say it was $1 million project, and 250,000 was the sewer. The sewer would be put in. We'd request a draw, and our engineer would inspect it with the third party with the bank. You know what I mean? And then at that time, they would request it from the city to inspect it. So that's in, and just what Mike was saying was definitely correct. It wouldn't have all the pressure tests, but they would say that was in. And the inspector, I mean, the engineer would kind of be more on the hook that it was. And then so on for the storm and the water and the whole deal, you know. And then, like you said, you're sitting there holding, if it's 45%, you know, you're holding quite a bit to get it done. And like I said, Jamie can come out there in probably 20 minutes, and he can tell right off the bat by looking at the engineer's inspection and also him seeing what's there, he knows right away if it's there or it's not. You know what I mean? Am I speaking wrong on that? Or you know what I mean? Or a couple hours or whatever it is. Yeah. And you know, back to the, you know, the risk of the city, there might be a little bit more risk, but you know, it gets the deal, and then I'm just trying to explain how those draws work. You know what I mean? So it's a lot minimal inspection until it's the last inspection.
It's important to know that the banks send out their own inspectors. I never caught that.
Yeah, well, what they typically do is they hire, if I'm using engineer Marlowe there, they hire them and do a separate contract with them. You know, it's just like somebody else hired Scott Walker besides the city. And so that way they report back to them. That way the guy's not working for me to do the inspection. You know what I mean?
Makes sense.
So you got the bank, because they're more worried about the money than anybody. You know how them greedy bankers are. And then you also have the city looking too, you know, of course, what they would have. So and so I think the risk, you know, like you said, you know, it's pretty minimal, I would think. You know, if it goes bad, it goes bad. But I don't. And as far as the city having to do more inspections than they're doing now, they're kind of inspecting it anyway. And you know, Jamie's liable to come out there and look and see what's going on now, you know, at any time. And,
I think the issue, Tripp, you might want to speak to this, is not the number of inspections, but the timing of the inspection. So if I'm a developer and I'm dependent on that draw to pay my guys on Friday.
Yeah, well,
and I didn't get the inspection on that Friday. Now I can't get to the bank, and I'm going to go to Country Kitchen on Saturday, and you know.
Yeah, this isn't kind of like a draw for a house that you're going along and need an inspection on it. You know, I mean, these are big draws. I mean, so if we're running that tight, we're in trouble already.
Right.
You know what I mean? So, and to be honest with you, probably the timing, like if I was going to get Jamie, you know, to come inspect, I'd say, hey, we need to get inspection there, and maybe it's Monday. He said, well, I might can make it there Thursday, or I might can make it next Monday. And that's the timeline we're looking for. I mean, we're not calling him and say, yeah, we're not calling him and say, yeah, we're not going to call him and say, hey, we need an inspection this afternoon, and then, you know, it's 1 o'clock.
Right.
You know, because the first thing he's got to do, he's got to get the engineer's verification letter, and he's got to get the deal. So, I mean, these inspections are, you know, for us aren't even usually monthly. It's usually on whatever we got on that thing. So that's kind of where it is. And like you said, the advantage for us as a developer, you know, especially because what we're doing is like new phases and behind where we're already at. It's not that big, you know, but to get these surety bonds, I mean, the paperwork and the information you've got to give these insurance companies just, I mean, that's a stack that you just wouldn't believe. But it'd just be a extra, you know, just another deal that would make it easier. But as far as, like you said, the backlash on inspections, I would say on a $1 million or $2 million project, you'd probably ask for maybe 3 or 4 inspections, 3 or 4 draws. Now, different developers may ask for different things, but I don't think nobody's gonna be looking at, it's not like a building inspecting, I guess. Would you say that?
You're correct. And, I mean, it would have worked similar to the old tri-parties in terms of the number of inspections, and we didn't see them any more than monthly, and if that, and there were typically no more than 3 to 5 before the project was over with, and we were doing our final inspections.
And then too, even if you did a surety agreement or whatever, we're still getting, the engineer's still verifying that, and at the end of the deal, the city's got to inspect it. And so once they inspect it, at that point, it's kind of the same deal. You know what I mean? I mean, so, because once they say, all right, we're going to take over the acceptance of this, and we say that it's good, you know what I mean? But, I mean, y'all got good people who know how to do that, so, they've been doing it for a long time.
That. Yeah,
There you go.
All right. Good deal. All right, Commissioner, do we have any other public comment? Commissioner Coleman?
Well, ultimately, the banks is the guy. I mean, you know what I'm saying? They're gonna do whatever it takes to cover their exposure. So they're gonna have somebody out there inspecting, and it's a lot different when you're using the reference of a house because they go by a percentage of completion, but they're sending an appraiser out there. And if my wife knows nothing about construction, she goes by a checklist, say, yeah, well, okay, yeah, that is there, that's there. But it's a lot different when it comes to commercial work. So
I'm sorry, you're going to have to clarify because I know you were kind of on the fence. So are you saying you've got more comfortable with this?
I'm very comfortable with it.
Okay, all right. That's why I wanted to make sure I understood the nature of the comments.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when it comes to from my past, being a commercial loan officer, I mean, you're dealing with engineers, and I don't see the exposure of the city that bad. I don't see it. And now that I've studied it and everything, I think I'm going to be voting for this. So.
Okay. Any other commissioner comments? Okay. Hearing none. We have a motion for the first option, which is
It's the passage of ordinance 2018-21, which permits the section 5.39 and this alternate bonding that we have, that we've been discussing with the drawdowns to the 45% level.
And per the options for consideration, that is option 1, approval of the ordinance on first reading with no changes.
Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Brian. All right, and we'll move right on to item B. Mr. Attorney.
Mr. Mayor, this is ordinance number 2018-18, an ordinance pertaining to utilities within the city of Newberry, amending Chapter 98, Section 98-97 of the Code of Ordinances of the city of Newberry by adding an additional provision to be known as Section 98.98-97C3, adoption of the policies for the cross-connection control plan, repealing all ordinances in conflict, and providing an effective date. The appropriate motion is to pass ordinance number 2018-18 upon its reading by title only.
Do I hear that motion? Commissioner Coleman makes the motion. Commissioner Farnsworth makes the second. All right, Jamie.
I'll try to keep this as brief as possible and the least
Please.
amount of technicality as possible, but it's sort of like the fats, oil, and grease ordinance. We have existing cross-connection language in our ordinance now, but there's really no policy to enact it. Basically, a cross-connection is a connection between a public potable water supply and some other supply or device that may or may not be potable. And those are prohibited by the Florida Building Code, by the Florida Administrative Code, unless they have appropriate backflow protection on those. So back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when this came into play, the city passed a cross-connection control ordinance and put it in the code. But there was really no record keeping or policies as to how it would be enforced. And each community water system is required to implement and establish a cross-connection control program utilizing backflow protection at or near the service connections in order to protect the community water system from contamination. This program shall also include a written plan that is developed using practices recommended and established by the American Water Works Association. So what we're asking you to do tonight is to enact these policies so we can actually inventory the backflow prevention assemblies that are installed in the city, determine where they have been removed after they were originally installed, and where we can document and keep the records necessary and required by the Florida Administrative Code that we have to produce for Florida Department of Environmental Protection upon request.
Guys, have any questions for Jamie? Seems like a pretty good idea to me.
Jamie, what are some examples of where this would be in place?
If you had a developed auxiliary water supply on a piece of property, commercial or residential, example of that type of cross connection would be where the well and the city system were connected together. If that well pressure switch was set at 65 pounds and we did not have backflow protection at the meter, and we are only running 53 pounds or 54 pounds in our system, there would be times that that well on that piece of property would be pumping into the city system. That well water hasn't been tested. We have no idea what's in it or what is not, but it could potentially contaminate or cause sample issues with our potable water system. That's a back pressure situation. A backflow situation is if you didn't have a device to protect that service connection, we had a main break on the street, and there was a hose in the pool, or there was a hot tub full of water. When we went to negative pressure on our side, we could actually draw a siphon and back siphon all the water out of every water using device on that piece of property, whether it was a pool, the hot water tank, the toilet, or whatever. So that's the back siphonage example. So these could potentially be required at residential connections. There has been a requirement in the past for them to be installed at the service connection. You can actually ride around town and see where they were originally installed, and the piping's above ground, and it's been cut out and removed and straight piped through. They're required on commercial connections such as fire sprinkler systems, in-ground irrigation systems, any type of commercial activity or piece of equipment that has pressurization or the water is no longer considered potable. Marshall and the building department inspects for backflow protection at specific devices, which isolates it at that one point of the property. But there's nothing that isolates it from returning to the system unless you have a assembly installed at the water service connection as per Florida Administrative Code. That's about as brief as I can.
That what you wanted to answer?
Thank you.
Any other questions for Jamie from the dais?
Mr. Mayor,
Manager?
Jamie, did you cover,
you got it all.
Is there a state mandate? I mean, does the state of Florida, since we operate a water system, do they have any?
We are required to maintain an inventory, require the assemblies where needed by hazard level, and produce and provide testing and inspection records upon request.
So where I was going with that is we're required by our permit to operate a water distribution system to have a backflow prevention program in place. And what we've had, this is greatly enhancing what we've had today. This is kind of like we did with the last meeting with Pat's Oils and Greases. We were calling it FOG on the water side. It's protecting our water distribution system so that we are in compliance with state and federal requirements.
This is actually complying with state and federal law, not just having an ordinance on the books that you don't enforce.
Any other questions, comments from the dais? Does the public have any questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passed unanimously. Thank you, Jamie, doing a great job. Invite the chief on down to talk to us about the termination of the Alachua County Fire Services Agreement, which is a non-hostile termination. It's just as part of a contract, we got to work through that, correct?
That's correct. Good evening, Mayor and Commission. That agenda item more appropriately should say renegotiate the Alachua County Fire Services Agreement rather than termination. This item, as we stated, relates to the Fire Services Agreement that we have with Alachua County for the provision of fire suppression, first response EMS, and the unincorporated portion of the county. Our recommended action is that we authorize the city manager to issue that letter to the county stating that we wish to renegotiate. Our current agreement went into effect October 1 of 2016, goes through fiscal year FY19. There's a provision in the current agreement that if neither parties want to negotiate, the current amount that we received today, which is $185,000, that number would stay in effect. A little bit of back history, that's some items that have been going on with the county. The county has a new interim fire chief. Chief Norcutt retired. Harold Theus is the interim fire chief. He was the deputy chief before. Chief Theus is currently in the process of working on a new methodology. When we've had these discussions in the past over the years, it's been really hard for anybody to explain how you come up with that number. So that's something that Chief Theus is working on. He and I have had several conversations regarding that item. Those conversations have resulted in some positives for Newberry and some other municipalities. The Board of County Commission on December the 4th of this year authorized county fire staff to begin negotiations with the contract fire stations. Therefore, in accordance with our agreement that we currently have, we have until December 31st to notify the county in writing that, hey, we want to negotiate our contract. County's already received several from other municipalities. The reason that you're hearing it now, that date, we had to wait till after September 30th of 2018. But we also wanted to hear what the county's proposal was going to be and how they were going to try and rectify the methodology issue. So that's where we're at. It's time to renegotiate that contract. We haven't discussed specifics, but Chief Theus and I have met a couple different times, and I did go to that Board of County Commission meeting. It seems pretty positive, to be honest with you, as we would expect. It's not a contentious item. There's some winners, there's some big winners, and there's some smaller winners. The numbers that we've seen for us, just these are preliminary numbers, but we're potentially going from 185 to the neighborhood of 210 or 220. How we get to that number every year for budgeting purposes, that's our next discussion, because obviously our biggest concern, and the county's quite frankly, how do you budget for that if you're basing on call load? You know, if your call load in X was this, and how do you get to that number for budget time next year? So that's some of the fine details that still have to be worked out. And there's been no real negotiations. There's just been conversations and ideas tossed around. But what we're asking tonight is that you just authorize the manager in accordance with the current agreement to notify the county in writing that we wish to renegotiate the funding for the provision of fire suppression and first response EMS for our fire services agreement.
Does the Dice have any questions for Ben?
I'll make a motion. We do so.
Motion from Commissioner Martin. There was no conversation. I know Commissioner Martin's already ready to get a motion from Commissioner Martin, a second from Commissioner Glanzer.
Mr. Mayor, the provision that we're talking about, and I think we should reference this in the agreement, there is, as the Chief stated in Section 12, there's termination for breach, termination due to funds availability, and then termination for convenience, and that's not the section that we're dealing with, which is Section 12. We're dealing with Section 10, and then G, as in Goyam. Notwithstanding any provision of the contractor, contrary, after September 30th, 2018, the city may notify the county of its desire to renegotiate the amount specified in subsection A by providing written notice to Letcher County Fire Rescue to be received by December 31st of the year immediately preceding.
What is Goyam?
It's a joke.
Oh, okay. Okay.
You got
okay.
that.
Fantastic. Good.
Okay, so I have a motion from Commissioner Martin, a second from Commissioner Glanzer. Was there any conversation or questions from the Dice?
I didn't.
Commissioner Martin, you did have?
Yeah, I encourage us to be involved in the solution. I think we've kind of developed a little bit of a reputation to be able to take our ideas to the county here as of late, and I think this just kind of sends us a little bit further down that road. You know, we have a really good benefit of being able to take small case studies because we're, you know, a smaller municipality, but you add a couple of zeros on to the end of it and scale it up, and the county's got a pretty good just add water solution most of the time. So I think being part of the solution is very, very encouraging, and I hope we support this.
And that was certainly our intent, was to be part of the solution.
Just like law.
You know, we weren't, as it stands right now, we're not the big winner, you know, but we now have a rhyme or reason as to how we get to those numbers.
Sure. Any other questions or comments from the dais? Does the public have any questions or comments? Before I call for a vote, I just wanted to highlight that this is yet another instance of the brand new relationship we have with Alachua County, because we were able to successfully work with them in the structured agreement. Newberry is a separate category because they recognize that Newberry runs an extremely professional fire department, and we should be treated as such and not lumped in with other municipalities. So they recognize that because we have that relationship, we were able to reach out to them and work towards that. And so I just want to take a minute and thank them. It's a much better experience in Newberry when we're all able to get along and work together well, and that's been our experience for the last few months. And so I wanted to thank them for that. And with that, all in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, Chief. All right, Mr. Manager, you're going to take us through Alachua County proposal to raise the tobacco buying age limit.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, before I jump into that, kudos to Commissioner Martin for working in the metaphor, just add water on the fire protection discussion. That's very creative.
He had to top the Guillaume.
Goyam, there you go. Mr. Mayor,
there you go.
The Alachua County Board of County Commissioners is considering an ordinance, and I'm not certain when. I think it'll probably happen in the January timeframe, to raise the minimum age to purchase tobacco products within Alachua County or inside Alachua County from 18 to 21. And the way that the ordinance is currently being structured is that any municipality that elects not to participate can opt out. One of the cities in Alachua County thought that the action of opting out sent signals to their community that made them look like this was not an important issue to them, or they didn't want to be in partnership with the county or any of those things, didn't like the signals that it was sending to their residents, and that their reason to not be engaged in this ordinance may have nothing to do with the social issue of smoking between 18 and 21. So they requested that the Board of County Commissioners amend their ordinance to allow municipalities that wish to participate to opt in. It's just a shift in how you go about participating in the county's ordinance or not. And so this item is being presented to our board to ask if they would like to weigh in with the Board of County Commissioners with a similar request, that they amend the language to include an opt-in provision for municipalities, or whether we're comfortable with the opt-out.
Board?
There's already current.
Commissioner Martin.
Sorry, there's already a current opt-out.
There is.
In there. So it goes into effect. We would have to create an ordinance that says we're opting out.
Correct.
Understood.
Any other questions or comments? I've talked to the county commission about this, and there's really not very passionate feelings here. They really do understand that the edge cities would experience an economic impact because it's much easier for people on the edge of the county to just go across the county line. Whereas people that live downtown Gainesville might not necessarily have that same ability to just drive 5 minutes. So they get that, they understand it, which is why they put the opt-out in there. We felt it was important while the city of Alachua was submitting this that we just showed the solidarity in that. So that's why it's in front of you here tonight. But the opt-out is already, or will be in if it passes. Commissioner Coleman.
I haven't read this, and is the is there any language in there if you're military that you can buy at 18, 19, 20?
Moves the buying age, if I'm wrong, buying age from 18 to 21 for everybody. Is that, I'll defer to legal if there was some clause I missed.
And it's our understanding that, that it wouldn't apply to military bases. So if you're in the military and you're on base, you would still be able to purchase tobacco products in accordance with federal requirements, similar to the way they can purchase, as I understand it, the military personnel can purchase alcohol products on a military base.
So it's not, I mean, there's no military bases here, so it's not, so it's not covering our guys and gals that are out there fighting for this country and them having the decision to go out there and be able to protect us, but then here, they can't make their own decision here. I have a little problem with that.
Mr. Mayor, my suggestion would be there's no existing language in the ordinance that provides an opt-out procedure. In other words, how do we determine whether we should opt out or, and the opt-out ordinance law is a little difficult. In other words, in order to opt out, you have to state a municipal purpose. And we would have to craft some sort of a language that would say, because of this public purpose, the city of Newberry decides that we determine that it's necessary to opt out. As the title of the language is, the provisions of the chapter shall apply to all unincorporated and incorporated areas of the city and may be opted out by the various municipalities, but it doesn't really state what the procedure would be. So my opinion would be we would still need to state some sort of municipal purpose to opt out.
So, wait, let me make sure I understand what you're saying. So you're saying even if they decline to give us the opt-in, then our next request would be you need to clarify your opt-out language. Tell us under what grounds.
That's right. We can just opt out for any reason whatsoever. The law on opting out is that in order to opt out, you have to state a municipal purpose for doing so. It may be very difficult for us to opt out of an ordinance such as this and state a legitimate public purpose. So I think it makes it difficult on us. And my suggestion would be that we write a letter to the county attorney's office, county manager, however you'll determine to do it, that we respectfully request that the language be changed in the title, purpose, and applicability to just simply allow the incorporated areas of the county to opt in as those cities deem it necessary.
Would, Scott, the opt-out language, would negative economic impacts not be a municipal purpose?
I think it could be. That would be one of the areas that we could point to try to state that, because, you know, we could do a study to say, okay, we're losing, our businesses are losing X amount of dollars, then that would be certainly something that would be a possibility.
Okay. And we could modify the letter to say, because of the difficulty of opting out, we request the opt-in.
Right.
However, as a last resort, we would request that the county look at the specificity of the language about opting out to recognize the adverse economic impacts for the cities that lie close to the county line.
Where this comes from, there's a case out of Volusia County. It's called Volusia County versus Ormond Beach. And the county passed, I think it related back to impact fees. County passed a countywide impact fee. Ormond Beach said, we opt out. We just simply, no stated public purpose.
Yes,
and the 5th ECA said, you didn't state a public purpose, and therefore it's not a valid opt-out.
Okay.
So this gets us a little closer because it allows for an opt-out by the various municipalities. I still think in order to have a valid opt-out, you need to state a municipal purpose.
Does it, I don't want to get into a situation where we have to hire a consulting firm to do a study to show the economic impact. Is it enough to state the economic impact that they've already stated to us that they know would happen? Or do we have to be able to prove the economic impact? If you have to prove an economic impact, I mean, that's a
if you're
pretty big
contested on
question.
it, if you were in a contest, you'd have to prove it up.
Okay.
The better procedure is simply opt in. If you want to opt in, then that would be, so my suggested language in the letter would be, we respectfully request you change this provision to an opt-in ordinance.
Okay, Commissioner Herson and then Commissioner Lane.
Certainly from a home rule standpoint, I think the opt-in speaks much better to the home rule, and I believe Mayor Cooper from Alachua alludes to that in his letter to the BOCC. Allowing us to opt in is, allow us to make decisions for our own good rather than us having to have a negative decision regarding that. So I would certainly support a letter to the BOCC that indicates that we want the opt-in option rather than having to formally opt out.
Commissioner Glanzer?
I strongly support opting in to raising the tobacco buying age. Not doing so, I think, sends a strong message. And we've got this opioid initiative going and all these other things, and I think this goes with it. And I think tobacco needs to not be in the hands of an 18-year-old, and so I support raising the limit.
Commissioner Farnsworth?
Working with people on a daily basis, doing bronchoscopies on people that have lung masses, 95% are directly caused from smoking. And I think that anything that can be done to discourage the start of smoking, whether they're general citizens or military, we should encourage. It's a horrible habit to get stuck into, and it starts at a younger age, and if that can be deterred in any way, shape, or form, I think we should support that.
And I want to make it clear, I think that the, Gibb over in Alachua, Mayor Cooper, his whole point is the danger of the mixed signals, that saying that we want to opt out somehow is an endorsement of tobacco products, which I don't think anybody on this dais supports tobacco, dip, any of those kinds of activities. What we want to be clear on is what is a proper role of government, and when we say you're an adult at 18, what does that mean? You can fight and die for your country at 18. What does that mean? And we're just in a different economic situation than Gainesville. Gainesville can pass something like this and not necessarily feel any economic effects, whereas our local business, it's a pretty easy thing to do. So I don't want this issue to be distorted with an endorsement for or against tobacco. I think everybody up here is probably pretty strongly anti-tobacco. And that's the whole idea behind the opt-in part of it. So
I would think that
Commissioner Farnsworth?
I would think that the economic impact would be negligible. I don't think it'd be that much of a factor.
And that's, you may be right. That's why I think, if opting out means we have to prove there's an economic, then you're going to have to hire a consulting firm to prove that. We're probably not going to shell out money to do that. So it might be the opt-out is offered to us, but it might not be a very viable solution, is kind of what I'm hearing. So the question before you is, do you want to submit a letter to the county asking for the opt-in option to opt into raising the buying age? That's what we're voting on. So if you say yes, then you're saying, well, you want to send a letter to the BOCC saying that we would prefer to opt into this ordinance, not have the opt-out. But if we do not get the opt-in, we would like you to be clearer in your language about how a municipality goes about opting out. So that's the motion on the floor. Is that right? Do we have a motion on the floor, Ms. Judy?
I don't think so either.
No, we do not have a motion on the floor. So is there any more conversation from the dais on this, Commissioner Farnsworth?
Yeah, I don't see where that's even necessary.
Which one is necessary?
The ordinance to actually opt into the thing, because if either way, if you don't opt in, then you're saying the same thing, that you're not supporting it, versus if you just if you opt out of it, then you're not supporting it. It's just
I think
it's their perception.
I think it could be the financial cost of, if you have to have evidence to opt out, that could be the difference.
And certainly, I think, from a home rule standpoint, we want to be able to still maintain our individuality and be able to decide what is best for our community, because we can decide that best than the Board of County Commissioners. Whether we ultimately would raise it to 21 or 18, and this is one litmus test, what's the next one that the County Commission will impose on us? And so I'd rather have the option to say yes than have to make a negative choice. I believe 21 I'm not an advocate for tobacco. I don't use tobacco, but I want the choice to be able to say, yes, I want that ordinance, rather than having to say, no, I don't want that ordinance.
Commissioner Martin?
If I was to be critical, I think arguably the same argument that we were making for home rule, the individual, drilling it down even further, the individual has the ultimate home rule here. And I think the ordinance as it's proposed is just a little bit clunky to begin with, because it talks about the person being a minor, but then they're stating that they're not, that it is getting it increased to 21. Just government's getting involved in this stuff is always a little hairy and troublesome to me. I think ultimately it's actually kind of a hollow gesture, because I think people are going to get cigarettes just like they're going to get alcohol, and I don't know. I think we've had some history of being a little bit more advocate of things like education and things like that. I probably would, I don't know, favor something a little bit further than that, but I don't know how much more education you could possibly do to the public to tell them that cigarettes are going to kill them, but people still buy them. So I don't know. It's just I mean, I would support either one, but that's just kind of my thoughts on the matter.
And I would have to tell you that even the BOCC is kind of lukewarm on this. No one believes that this is going to be a silver bullet to eradicate smoking. I think it's feeling like somebody should do something. And ultimately, I think this is a failure of the federal government to just come down and say, here's an age, and once you're this age, you're an adult. And once you hit this age, you can go to the military. Once you're this age, you can buy a gun. Once you're this age, you can do all of the adult things, instead of kind of breaking it up into these pieces and forcing us to have these kinds of conversations. So whether you guys want to submit the letter or not submit the letter, I think there's a general feeling in the county that, this is a lukewarm effort, which is why I think the letter becomes even more important, because it should be less beholden on us to opt out of something that everyone is a little lukewarm about. Commissioner Coleman?
Well, I'm not for this, and if anybody, I'm not for any tobacco use. I just go and watch my mom with her COPD struggles that she's got. But I am big with my military, and with no verbiage at all in there with that, because, they've made a choice to be in the military and to fight and die for our country, and they're not even going to put that little bit of verbiage. So, nah, I'm not for it.
All right, any other questions or comments from the dais? We'll open it up for the public to weigh in. Does anyone from the public want to weigh in on whether we don't have a motion on the floor, actually, so we need to get a motion on the floor to know what we're inviting the public to comment on. The suggestion is, do we submit a letter to opt in?
I make a motion to submit the letter to opt in.
Okay.
To raising the tobacco age buying limit.
All right, I have a motion. Do I have a second to submit a letter to ask the county to consider allowing us to opt into this ordinance instead of having to opt out?
I'll second it under the condition that the matter that you were just bringing up, the hurdle to potentially opt out is greater than the one to opt in, right?
Right. The hurdle to opt in is just an ordinance say we're going to join your ordinance. All right, so I have a motion.
I'll second it.
To send a letter to opt-in by Commissioner Glanzer. I have a second from Commissioner Martin. Any further questions from the dais on the motion on the floor? Any public questions on the motion on the floor? All right, staff has a question. They count as the dais.
Mr. Mayor, I want to clarify that the motion is to send a letter requesting that the county amend their language to allow municipalities to opt in, and not to send a letter saying we're going to opt in. Okay, I just wanted to clarify that.
Is that, I thought that was crystal
Do I
clear.
have to revise my,
Nope, as long as it's clarified.
Right. Did you think that's what it was? Okay.
I thought it was to.
No, yeah, so the motion on the floor is for us to send a letter, right? Because the ordinance they're already drafting has the opt-out in there, albeit not very clear. What we're asking is to change that to an opt-in, right? That's what we're asking. So that's good.
We don't send a letter, and the ordinance passes on their part, then we're automatically opted
We're in.
Okay.
We're in. We would have to opt out of it to extricate. And they've, and sometimes they don't give the opt-out option. It's just mandated. So already that shows that they are cognizant, that every municipality is going to be affected by this in a different way. Okay, now that we're clear on the motion on the floor, thank you, Mr. New. Public questions on the motion on the floor to send a letter to change their wording to opt in. Okay. Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Roll call, Commissioner Coleman.
Aye.
Commissioner Herson.
Aye.
Commissioner Farnsworth.
No.
Commissioner Martin.
Aye.
Commissioner Glanzer.
Aye.
Motion passes 4-1. All right, and Brian, would you make your way back down here? I don't know, a couple months ago, staff brought forward a proposal for an economic development fee incentive program. You guys kind of kicked it around a little bit that night. You discussed it, and the basic, I can't remember if we were down one commissioner, but the basic feel was let's sleep on it and come back. So Brian is going to present the identical presentation to you, the exact same proposal, so that we can see where we are on this. And if you guys are in favor, then he'll go back and draft up the actual ordinance. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Thank you,
All
Mr.
right. Go ahead, Brian.
You're correct. A couple of months ago, in fact, September 10th, as you can tell by the fact
Look
that
at
I
that.
forgot to change the date on the original presentation. Exactly 2 months ago.
3 months.
October, 3 months ago, 3 months ago. And so, quick review, staff presented a three-part series related to the fees collected for development, commercial and residential. You basically get your planning fees, your building department fees, and your utility fees. Planning fees are charged kind of upfront during application processes for various land use changes or land use activities. They basically pay for the cost mainly of city staff time and some advertising for the various meet state statutory advertising and public notice requirements. Usually, overall on a large project, they'll typically constitute a pretty tiny portion of the overall cost. Building permit fees, again, charged on the total valuation of the project. Covers the costs of operating the building department, plan reviews and inspections, and the state only allows us to collect what it costs to operate the building department. There can be a little bit of a surplus or a little bit of a deficit, and in times like right now, we run a little bit of a surplus because we've got a lot of activity, more than we budgeted for last year. Things slow down, then it might turn into a slight surplus, and so if we have a deficit, and so if we have a surplus, we'll roll it to the next year to cover the potential for a deficit. And utility department fees fall into the two categories: the actual physical connection fees, and then the capacity fees, which go to pay either for a debt service or set aside for construction of new facilities to replace the capacity that's being used. If you remember your responses as far as planning fees, we discussed that quite a bit. They even though they typically don't constitute a large portion of a project, by reducing or waiving them or offering to reduce or waive them could send a positive message to a developer that the city is actively seeking commercial development. If, nope. Oh, I skipped it.
And I would say, before you move off of that point, guys, just like the utility deposit program, I think we mentioned earlier tonight, that's one of the biggest reasons I think we should consider it, because of the message that it sends. It gives us a talking point when we sit down with businesses. It gives us a headline. It lets folks know that we put our money where our mouth is. We say that we want commercial development, and look what we do, that I'm not aware of any other municipality around us engages in a program like this. So we have the referendum that kind of goes after some big business. Something like this would sort of go after that medium range business, smaller size business. Maybe a larger business can certainly take advantage of this. But before Brian moved off of that point, I think that deserves to be highlighted, that it is a beneficial incentive talking point for us.
As far as building department fees, the discussion centered around if we did reduce or waive the fees, to limit it to commercial developments only, not to extend it to residential. We don't have a need to incentivize residential, as you're all aware of. We've got quite a bit of that going on. It would provide an added incentive for new commercial projects, and the payoff is that down the road, commercial projects pay a higher level of taxes than does residential. There's no homestead exemption of any kind, commercial exemptions. There was some concern expressed that the cost of development should pay for itself and not be a burden on the taxpayers of the city. And we also, staff noted that due to the small number of commercial permits being issued, the actual impact to the budget was fairly nominal. It wouldn't be very much at all. And so we examined a 12-month period, August of 2017 through August 2018. Planning fees totaled a little over $12,000. Building department fees totaled about $28,000. This is commercial only. And then utility connection fees for water and wastewater development charges totaled about $19,000. And so if you break that down and look at it from three different perspectives, the total was just under $60,000 total for commercial permitting activity and fee activity. If you translated that into a millage rate, it would be 0.1455 mils. And if you looked at it on a resident basis, it would be, and actually it's a household basis, it would be roughly $16.44 per household if you spread the cost. The total cost of all of that, $59,486.
Commissioner Farnsworth, did you have a question before we moved off that?
I was just curious how, if you have a hybrid commercial and residential, do you separate the two out and charge a certain price for the commercial and a certain price for the?
Yes, for sure. Each one's evaluated separately, and so if you now if you were developing, I guess, multifamily, you would be looked at as a well, actually, it still would be looked at as residential, so we would still separate it out. The commercial component would be evaluated one way, and then the other would be, the residential component would be evaluated as residential.
Commissioner Glanzer?
I'm sorry, can you go back? On the bottom it says the average cost to residents if all fees are waived. Can we waive part of them? I mean, we don't have to waive all of them, do we? Or what's
yes, Mr. Mayor. I mean, this was just the maximum scenario.
Okay.
If the commission chose to say, you know what, we're going to do a moratorium on commercial development fees, and here's what the effect would be on a per household basis. And so your options would be, of course, to waive all or some of the fees, to waive or reduce commercial development fees based on performance criteria, and we'll talk about that a little bit again in a second, or leave them basically unchanged. And so if the commission did decide to reduce or waive the fees for commercial development, please consider the following things: offering reductions or waivers for new construction or expansion of existing construction only. Not necessarily. A lot of those commercial building permit fees were for things that are like remodels, or you need a new service box or something, and so it would not be for something that's bringing in a new business or something that's expanding an existing business. It's just your day-to-day needs, commercial needs for permitting. So we would recommend you consider doing it only for new construction or expansions. Tying them to performance criteria. So, for instance, if a developer comes in and they say, well, we're going to comply with all of your Florida vernacular design guidelines, they would basically get credit for that, and they would qualify for the reduction or waiver of the fees. Or if they're, right now we allow steel buildings, if they came in with a steel building and said, but we're going to put a brick or a stone facade on it to improve the aesthetics of the building that faces the main roadway, then they could qualify as an example. Or if they guarantee, well, we're doing an expansion, we're going to bring in 10 more, as a result of this expansion or this construction, we're going to bring in 10 new jobs to the city. That might be a qualifying criteria for the rebate. And then collect the fees up front, and then at the project completion, when you verify that they've complied with whatever the criteria the commission sets up as qualifying criteria, they would then get the money refunded back. For projects with high equivalent residential units, that's what we base our water and wastewater capacity fee charges on. For instance, we might limit the total number for a particular business. Say, if you had the example we use here would be a laundromat. If you have a laundromat that's going to have 50 machines, well, you're going to have 50 times the wastewater fee, $3,600 and change, and the water fee, $788. And that adds up tremendously. It makes it almost impossible to do one. Maybe we say, okay, we're going to limit the total ERUs for this type of business or something along those lines. We would recommend that you authorize the fee waivers or reductions by resolution, which would be renewed annually, or alternatively to that you put in a sunset provision that after a certain period of time, whether it's 2, 5, 10 years, that the program would expire and then have to be reauthorized or amended and reauthorized by the commission. So our staff recommendation was to reserve the fee waivers for new businesses or expansions of existing businesses, not just your run-of-the-mill routine permitting. Create a tiered system where, say, for all businesses, and this is where the mayor's comment comes into play, is that it would benefit not only the larger projects but also the smaller projects, waive all of the commercial development fees, say up to $10,000 for any new or expanding business, regardless of size. And then for the much larger projects, consider waiving, say, another 50% of their fees up to a total of $50,000. So, for example, the first $10,000 is automatic. If the project was actually would be charged a total of $50,000 in permitting fees over the course of the entire project, they could have 50% of that back, so another $20,000 of the additional 40 to get to 50. You give them half of that back, so they'd get a total of $30,000. As far as the size of that kind of a project, up to $10,000, I think worked out to be somewhere in the $500,000 range. And then, of course, you go up from there into the couple of $1 million range, you reach the $50,000. We would recommend that you set some design criteria or some standards that they would have to meet in terms of either they're going to develop to a certain design standard or create a minimum of jobs or both. To pay for the project, the staff doesn't advocate actually raising the millage rate. That was just to give you an example of what the equivalent would be. Staff would actually recommend that we create a seed fund for the first year up to $50,000, and then years 2 and beyond, if this commission wanted to keep the program, then we would budget for it in the successive years. And then, again, collect the fees up front, and upon completion and verification that they met all the standards that were established, that they would get the money back and be refunded. And again, just looking at the options, the alternative funding methods, raise millage rates, which is not staff's recommendation, increase fees on residential development. I mean, that is a possibility. Could at least recoup some of it, and then or draw from the general fund reserves and budget, or a combination of any of those three. So in conclusion, staff thinks it would be a good companion to the other incentives that we've already, come up with. It's good to have multiple tools, so to speak, in the toolbox. We've got the economic development ad valorem tax exemption now as a tool, the waiver of the utility fees if a business has credit. This would go hand in hand with that as an option. Already taken that unique step to do the utility deposits, and I think that we could get some good positive publicity for the City of Newberry in our efforts to promote commercial growth in the proactive steps that we're taking to send the message that this is a business-friendly community and that we're actively trying to promote and recruit new business to the community.
Okay, Brian, would you go back to the staff's proposal recommendations there now? Before we launch into what could be a lengthy conversation, remember that this is the broad strokes of an idea. If you guys like the idea, we do not have to work out every single point of this program tonight. We can give staff some pointers, and they'll come back with an idea, a program that we can then tweak further at that point. So I guess the first conversation needs to be, are we interested in a program like this? Because there's no sense in spending the next 30 minutes hashing out details if we're going to vote no on the program as a whole. So can we have that kind of conversation first, Commissioner Glanzer?
I like it. I think it rounds out our economic development package in a nice way. I think it creates incentives to elevate design standards that developers might have, because you're going to give them incentives to do the vernacular and all that. And then finally, as long as we collect the fees up front, and then they have to, fulfill their promises before they get the deductions, I think it could work. But I really like the idea, and I'd love to see the final proposal that you give us.
Okay, so that's Commissioner Farnsworth?
Yeah, the only problem I have with it is the developer is in it to make money, and they will make money off the project, and I don't see us compensating the developer and having it fall back on the citizens of Newberry to compensate his or her income. So, if there's some reassurance as to, well, the taxes or revenue generated from the business over a period of 5 years covers the $10,000 or $30,000, then I would say it's a good idea. But on the other hand, I just don't want to see us supplementing somebody's income while taking money away from the citizens.
What's the numbers you said to get the 10,000? You're looking at the $500,000 commercial development.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, about a $500,000, I think, would be a project that would qualify for up to $10,000. And so, I wish Dallas was here, but
yeah, I know. Where's Dallas when you need him? Run those numbers. Ballpark. We'll have, if you're interested in it, we can have those numbers brought back to you for that. Does that include your comments, Commissioner Farnsworth?
Well, just to add on that real quick, so Dallas could calculate a break-even cost for us as to.
I think that could be part of what you guys bring back, what staff could bring back would be.
Well, there's not a direct correlation between development fees and the property value that's going to be associated with that property once development is complete. I think there are others on the dais that are more qualified to speak to that than I am. But so I don't think it's an exact parallel. But what we could do is talk about at our current millage rate what the assessed value would have to be to have a 5-year or 10-year payback. So we could do that math and say that if the developer saves $30,000 on a project, and we want him to make that up with 5 years worth of taxes, then the assessed value of their property at the end of the project would need to be equal to X. And it'd kind of give you guys a benchmark for how this works. And you may then say, okay, now that we know that, this is how we'd like the program to look.
Does that answer your concern and your follow-up question? Okay, Commissioner Martin?
I think we're missing some of the point by just going dollar for dollar with what it's costing us, one way or the other. I mean, if this developer wants to come in and create a large project, $1 million project, the jobs they're going to create will far outweigh, I think, the few dollars it might cost us, you know, citizen by citizen. And if we're trying to grow the community, I think we need to look at the broader picture on what this kind of incentive is going to bring us. If it's that piece of, or that tool in the toolbox that makes it happen, I think it'll be worth it. So I hope we can look at it on a broader picture as what it's going to bring as far as economic development, jobs, you know, property tax base, and that kind of thing.
Commissioner Martin?
I don't think it's too much of an issue to set the staff off kind of in this direction, but I'm not really good at studying this kind of stuff on my own. I come up with more questions than I can get answers for right away, and I love the benefit of having other people in the room while we're going through it. And I'm thinking that when we bring this back, we kind of do it on a standalone workshop basis. This is a little bit too a finite constraint to really, I think, get the best option. And I think when we have that, if we can try to get, you know, Jerry Diedenbach, I had a great lunch with him about a month and a half ago, and the guy's just brilliant on a lot of the stuff that makes a difference in what developers really even care about. And if we can get folks like that in the room, then I would like to do something like that. If we can effort in that direction myself, that would benefit me.
I actually mentioned this program to Jerry. He thought it was a great idea. Now that was a very quick offhand, no nuts. But again, nothing that's on the slide in front of you is set in stone. Sure. It's a concept more than it is the nuts and bolts just yet.
I guess my summary would be: keep moving forward. Let's bring it back in a workshop that we can kind of dedicate a little bit more focused value, high value time towards this one particular topic.
Commissioner Coleman?
I 100% agree with Commissioner Glanzer. You know, we're talking the talk, but I don't know how much we're walking the walk. We need to be lowering fees. If you're gonna have any kind of incentive, we got to start lowering these fees. You know, we're a business-friendly community, but these developers, they're looking at what they're having to spend, and I think we wholeheartedly need to go with this. I'm 100% behind this.
Other questions from the dais?
Yeah, I'm supportive of moving this process forward. I like the staff's recommendations. I don't know what the workshop process would entail, but certainly getting all ideas to make it a good ordinance would be, I'd be supportive of that. So I am supportive of moving this process forward to get it accomplished, to make it the magnet for commercial development.
Okay, I guess the question then is the slide that you got in front of you enough of the broad stroke that staff can work off of those recommendations to formulate it? Because whether this comes back in front of you at a meeting and we try to make it a light meeting so we know that we can talk about this, or whether it comes back in front of you as a workshop, I think that's more beneficial to have something actually laid out so that everybody can look at it instead of just, because if we kick this down and we don't give them enough guidance to begin working on what this program will look like, it's going to take, you know, that much longer. So do we like the recommendations up here enough to be the broad strokes? I got some head nods.
Are you looking for a motion?
Well, I think at this point we just need a head nod to go back and work on this and bring it back to us in something that we could make a motion on. And then we can have conversations later about how do we want to do that, how do we want to have that conversation, whether it's a workshop or a light meeting. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments from the dais before we open up for public comment? Okay, anybody in the public like to make a comment on this agenda item? Come on down. And I'm not, now that you're heading down this way, I'm not ever sure that you introduced yourself to us the first time. So just to make sure for the record, the first comment was by Mr. Tripp Norfleet, who's back at the mic again.
Yeah, Tripp Norfleet. I was wanting to know if I could just read a quick thing that I wanted to send out about 6 months ago, and I don't know if I ever did, but it's just kind of on what y'all are talking about right here. And it just said, for the last 15 years, we've heard from candidates for the city commission. They want to see more commercial growth instead of residential in Newberry. I mean, they like the residential, but want commercial. We have heard how much the current city staff and current commissioners and want the commercial growth in new businesses. We have heard as well over the last 10 years comparisons of the charges from the city of Gainesville and the city of Alachua for the permits and impact fees. Even though Newberry is cheaper, we are still having a hard time getting that commercial growth, whereas those cities do not seem to be experiencing the same problem. We think the time is right in Newberry for commercial growth to happen. As a developer, I have been in frequent talks recently with businesses that would possibly like to locate here in Newberry. Dentist office, medical facility, bank, insurance agency, Japanese steakhouse. It is our belief that if we had 2 commercial buildings already constructed, some of those businesses would already be here. Now we would need to invest over $1 million per building to attract these businesses. We are prepared to make that investment. What we would ask the city is to cut the permit fees and development fees on sewer. Is to cut the permit fees and development fees on the sewer and water. Our company has paid the city over $400,000 in the last 3 years, and that was on permit fees and development fees on what do you call it, on the long-term sewer fees, capacity fees. Thank you, and donated infrastructure of over $3 million. We expect to pay them over $700,000 in the next 3 years and donate infrastructure over $5 million in the same time frame. But to entice these businesses to come to Newberry, we have to entice them, and we are prepared to offer favorable terms and deals to close the deal. You know, I've said for years that downtown Newberry, if you could have the buildings that were somewhat fixed up, and you could start these businesses and not charge them the full rent, and you kind of help incubate them. And it seems like to me, you know, over the years in downtown, the buildings were run down. Nobody really wanted to spend the money, and it was hard to get those businesses started. You know, just a real world scenario on that. We built that commercial building out there at our square. It cost us about $1.3 million. And before we even started, the permit fees were $48,000. Well, you had right at $21,000 for your sewer impact fees or impact or whatever you call them, fees, and you had about $9,000 worth of the water impact fees. That's $30,000. And you know, if you could waive those fees for even a period of 2 years, I mean, because once you hook these buildings up, you're paying water, sewer, electric. I think the tax bill, thank you, Ricky Coleman, on that building is.
Too much over time. I want to get you on record. Would you be in favor of us looking at something like that?
Oh, anything they could cut it down would be, but one of the things that the reserve fees would be, I think, something that would be able to cut. You know what I mean? Because you're already collecting them, and they already build up the sewer plant. They're building it into the thing, and y'all end up getting a lot of grants for that. And it looks like to me it could help. All right, man. Thank you. All right, man.
I appreciate it. Okay, so we've got any other public comment on the? All right, so we don't need a motion. We've got a head nod to take that broad strokes. Staff will bring it back to you, put it on the list of things to work on. I know that list is pretty light. All right, and with that, we are to comments. City manager? Oh, he's got a whole page. Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, just want to report that tomorrow night, staff is conducting a neighborhood meeting aimed at reducing some of our large enclaves. From time to time, we've had discussions about that. We refer to our city incorporated area as Swiss cheese, and both the County Board of Commissioners and our commission have asked us to reduce that, so we got together a pretty decent strategy. We're having a neighborhood meeting with 36 different parcel owners, or 36 different parcels, tomorrow evening to try to go through the merits of annexation and the process of annexation, and we'll see where it goes. If it works well, I'm certain that we'll continue this strategy as we identify other large enclave areas within the city.
Mr. Manager, did we public notice that meeting if more than one commissioner shows up?
It is not publicly
Okay,
noticed.
so I see a lot of people put that on the calendar. It's not a public notice, that
It's a
I think we
neighborhood
send
meeting.
out those invitations directly to
Yeah,
folks.
this is really a staff type of meeting, just wanted the commission to be aware. I should thank you for that clarification.
And as always, you're more than willing to come, but not everybody can talk, and you have to sit back in a corner and be quiet.
That's correct.
That's good enough there? Okay, that's good enough.
There's no reason for me to go.
Yeah. Yeah, welcome to attend, just no comment. I'll be out of town Thursday and Friday. I'm traveling to Orlando to meet with, I have meetings with FMEA and FMPA. Next Monday at 2 p.m. is the Alachua County Delegation meeting. It's where we'll be presenting the legislative agenda that you directed us to put together about 4 weeks ago. So we will have Senator Keith Perry, we'll have Representative Watson, Representative Clemens, and the representative from Lake City, who I can't, she's not our legislator, but they'll be in attendance as well. We'll be there with other cities. Very tight schedule, 2 to 5. And if you're planning to attend, remember that you'll be needing to leave no later than 3:30ish to make your way to the city attorney's office for ethics training. Also, with regards to the delegation meeting, the Gainesville Chamber is hosting a luncheon. Legislatures will be there. Lunch is free for elected officials, but you have to RSVP. So if you would like to do that, and I forwarded you an email, if you'd like to attend this luncheon where you have face-to-face time with our elected officials, it's at Santa Fe College. It begins at 12:30, and we just need to RSVP for you.
What day was
That is next Monday, the 17th, at Santa Fe College. The luncheon's at 12:30, and the legislative session begins at 2. Scott? Yes, that's my understanding. It's the same place. And finally, just to, it's kind of a bit of a preview. We won't have another city commission meeting, so it's a preview. For holiday work hours at City Hall, the week of Christmas, Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, or Monday and Tuesday, will be closed both, and that will reopen with regular business hours on Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday if you're the building and planning department, and some utility staff and some recreation staff. And then the following week, which is New Year's week, our regular work hours are Monday, which is New Year's Eve. We're closed on Tuesday, and then back to regular hours on Wednesday the 2nd, Thursday the 3rd, and again, the building department would be open on Friday the 4th. That concludes my comments, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. City Attorney.
Andrea, you're up.
Hi again, everybody. I met y'all a few weeks ago. I'm now officially at Bolton Walker. I'm Andrea True, and I just wanted to remind you that next Monday, December 17th, we have our Ethics, Public Records, and Sunshine Law training. It's at Bolton Walker at 4 p.m., and you need to RSVP to Lisa in our office. We're going to have food and drinks, so that's when you need the RSVP. And I believe that that's for your required ethics training of 4 hours, or 2 hours ethics training, 1 hour public records, 1 hour sunshine law. So we look forward to seeing you then, and have a great week.
Thank you. It's good to have you back. Can we RSVP right now, Amy? You'll tell. All right, thank you. Because I know that's the one thing I'll forget to do, and then I'll show up and say, well, there's no steak for you, Mayor Marler. You did RSVP.
I love that steak. Way to work that in.
That's impressive.
All right, Mr. Attorney, was that?
That's
we appreciate you
all
doing
of
that.
our announcements. Andrea, we're real pleased to have her. Today was her first day officially on the job, as she said, and we see her as a bright, shining star. She's practiced other areas of law, so she's not a brand-new lawyer, but she's brand new to the area of local government practice. So we think she's going to be a real high learning curve, and she's demonstrating that already, and we certainly welcome her aboard. She's accessible to you just like anybody in our office, so call the regular number, and if you can't get me or Rich, Andrea will answer your questions.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, sir.
Madam Clerk? It's a pretty stiff button there. It takes a
I know
while.
it's early. I just want to wish everyone a safe and happy holiday season. I've enjoyed working with you all this year, and I look forward to working with you in 2019. So happy New Year.
Thank you, ma'am. Always important to remember. Mr. Coleman? Caught you off guard.
Hey, Mike, have you figured out about the grass problem from the state yet? Have you had a chance yet?
The grass problem from the state. Can you enlighten the rest of us? What grass are we talking about?
Kogon grass, and I have yet to identify the one that's taking over our fields right now. But the state blows it out there, and in late summer, early fall, while you still got some green grass, 337, all that's being eat up with it. So you haven't noticed it? I'll show you. It grows up like dadgum sawgrass.
I'm too busy watching the cracks in the road and the lack of painting and all that kind of stuff to look at the grass. That's a road you got to keep your eyes on.
All the way, even that's not in the city, the Rosses out there, and all, they're like, where did this stuff come from? And it's taking over these fields. So I just got Mike on a special project.
And Mr. Mayor and Commissioner Coleman, I have not determined the issue there, but we are working on it.
Because he knows people.
He does. I mean, if it's local, county, state, national level, he's your guy.
There you go.
He's your guy. Is that all your comments, Commissioner Herson?
Just wish everybody an early Merry Christmas, and that'll be it.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Farnsworth?
Come to the parade next Saturday.
5:30.
And the Christmas festival afterwards.
Yeah, I too wanted to wish everybody Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. And also the, I guess the city luncheon our dinner is on Friday. And the parade we have on Saturday, so just remind everybody of that. Are we using the fire truck that continuously breaks down?
I think we finally give up on the fire truck do we think it can make one more? I don't think,
It'll run beautifully the week before the parade,
Yeah.
no matter how many hours we test it.
that might be the way to do it. Yeah. So I think if you're planning on being in the parade, you might want to plan on working out your own ride. Because I think the fire truck is usually the cheerleaders get a hold of that. Somebody already claimed the real fire truck, not the antique fire truck, because the cheerleaders usually jump all over that and in the back. So, but I'll try to coordinate and figure something out for everybody to participate on. Do we have a head count about how many people will be in the parade this year? Because I know you've got your own float. You've got your own. You'll be there.
Unless I have to walk.
Okay, so we've got 3 who will need a ride. We'll see if we can figure it out.
What about the city manager's new car?
Well, his old car's
How
still
about
here.
the city
How about
manager's
old
old
car?
car?
We like antiques, right?
Yeah, we'll convert it to convertible for you.
Commissioner Martin?
Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, whatever holiday you tend to celebrate this time of year. And I just want to thank everybody here for a great year. I've really enjoyed the pleasure of going about this thing we call government with everybody. Obviously, this time of year can be very stressful for a lot of people. Feel free to reach out to a friend or a neighbor you haven't talked to in a while. Just check on them. Neighbors, especially with cold weather, should go without saying, and I know we do a pretty good job about it in this community of taking care of each other. So I'm sure that will get done. Town Square has a Christmas party after the parade on Saturday, so just keep your eyes and ears open. A lot of great stuff going on around here this time of year, so it's a good time to be in Newberry.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner
I'll
Glanville?
echo all that. Merry Christmas to everybody, and to my friends of other faiths. Whatever you celebrate, may it be warm and happy and loving. And I too have enjoyed working with everybody this year. It's been a great year for Newberry, and I look forward to 2019 as well. So thank you, and Merry Christmas.
Thank you. Absolutely. I have a couple of announcements to make. We received notice this week that we did receive the next CDBG grant for $700,000. It's going to be the housing development grant, so that will allow folks who houses need renovations, they need to be fixed up, to go through the application process. We're still at the early stages. I'd remind the commission that this is the most staff-heavy CDBG grant that we've received in the past 10 years, maybe for longer than that. So it's a great thing, but it also is going to divert some attention while we manage each of those projects, because this one will go towards 7 to 10 small projects, whereas in the past we've gotten one big grant to do one big thing. But should be, it's been a while since we've had this, so I know we've got a lot of residents that have asked us to go after this one, and once again, Newberry has been successful in it. I had the pleasure of meeting a couple of days ago a guy named Bobby White, who some of you may know as the basketball cop. A couple of years ago, he got dispatched to a call that was against some kids playing basketball in the street, and instead of taking some other action, his response was to get out of basketball and play with the kids. And somebody caught it on video, and it became viral and went all over the place. And so he's created the Basketball Cop Foundation. He works with Shaq, who's come down and done some PR stuff with him. And the mission at Christmas time is to do a toy drive and then have officers on Christmas Eve and Christmas morning deliver toys to families directly. And his goal is not just to help kids who need some help at Christmas time to have toys, but to create a connection between kids and officers that's a very positive connection. So he's asked to work with Newberry to create those connections inside of Newberry. So the toys that Newberry collects will be delivered to families inside our area, not necessarily those toys, but it will happen in our neighborhood. The fire station is a drop-off point, so you can go by and drop the toys off there. I'm sure that if we drop them off at City Hall, we'll make sure they get over there into the big collection. And he's asking to try to do that by December 20th if you can. That gives him time to organize age-appropriate toys to the families that they've identified and make sure they've arranged how to get them out here. I think we've already talked about the Christmas parade at 5:30 is when the parade starts. So lineup starts about 4:30 at Walker's Produce Stand. It'll have the same route as it's had for years. So it'll turn west on Newberry Road from Walker's, and it'll go through town. And then after that, make your way down to the town square for Christmas on the Square. Last year, it was put together at the last minute, and it was just like walking into a Hallmark movie. So I'm sure that with some time to plan, it's going to be another beautiful, magical event. Unfortunately, my family has something scheduled this year. This will be the first Christmas parade I've missed in about a decade. So you guys have to take lots of pictures and put them all over Facebook for me. I want to say thank you to the entire town. I was talking with our chief before the meeting, and for Hurricane Michael, we filled up our ambulance bay about 4 times over to send relief supplies up to the Panhandle, and that's incredible for a town our size to collect that much material to send up. So good job, everybody, on working on that. Finally, as Commissioner Martin said, this can be a stressful time of year. And so I want to make sure everybody is aware that there is a suicide hotline. All you have to do is text 741-741. And somebody will text you immediately back and will continue texting you back and forth until you're in a better state of mind. So they won't leave you. They'll stay with you as long as you need. I know that for a lot of folks, talking on a phone is not very comfortable. They prefer to text. So that hotline is 741-741. And with that, I'll say Merry Christmas to everybody up here. It's going to be hard to top 2018 in the city of Newberry. We've had so many accomplishments this year. It's been a roller coaster that's been hard to hold on to. But you guys have done amazing work. Our staff has done amazing work. I want everybody to have a wonderful, safe holiday. And with that, we'll open it up to public comment. Does the public have any comment? Hearing none. We are adjourned.